We're talking here about global citizenship, and really what I'm talking about is what we can do as Kiwis in order to change the world on an international scale. I'm going to focus on two issues. So there we go. The first of these issues is the fact that we're straining at our planetary boundaries. We are essentially living beyond our means with regard to the ecological carrying capacity of our planet. This is just a rather busy map showing areas where there is likely to be sea level rise, where there's water scarcity, where there's heavy pollution, where there's a loss of biodiversity, deforestation, you name it. These are all environmental problems that spring from the same root cause. And the same root cause is that we are consuming too much of the planet's resources and we are living beyond its carrying capacity. But there's a worse problem, because if you look at this graph, it's I think a really intriguing picture. And what it shows is if this is the Earth's carrying capacity, we're living beyond the Earth's carrying capacity. That's the dark green box. That's economic activity in the world today. But the thing is, if you look at this little box here, that's the resource share of the poorest 20% of people in the world. And they're not rich, and they lack the basic human rights of life. They lack the basic necessities. And so we have a dual challenge. We've not only got to shrink this box so that we live within the Earth's carrying capacity, we need to give these people opportunities to live a decent life. You know, for example, in India, the 450 million people who don't have access to any energy source apart from dung and fuel wood, we've got to give them a chance to be able to use energy. And we've got to make sure it's renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuels. So we have this kind of dual challenge facing us. One is to shrink our overall footprint on the Earth's planet, and the second is to increase the share of the world's poorest people. And that's the kind of context for what I'm going to talk about today. Because for many people in the world, this is starting to be the reality. This is from Kiribati. It's climate change induced storm surges and high sea swells. And you know, what do the people along the coast of New York and New Jersey know about storm swells? They've had 4.5 meters sea swells. And there are today articles in the paper and credible scientific research that says there is a very strong case for saying that this is related to climate change. And if you now read what the climate scientists are saying, they're no longer saying these are the kind of events that are more likely to happen under climate change. And in fact, they're saying these events are climate change related. And that's increasingly the reality for people in the poorest part of the developing world. They don't have the government infrastructure to be able to clean up as New Jersey does. They don't have insurance policies. They don't have savings to fall back on. They don't have food supplies that they can fall back on. When disaster strikes, they have nothing. And that's the reality of their lives. So climate change is hitting first and worst on the people who have the least capacity to cope. And that's the real injustice of climate change, because these people didn't cause climate change. They're not the ones who caused the problem. It was the people who drive their SUVs and operate air conditioning and emit pollution at a really high rate. And as you will see as we go through the presentation, that includes us. New Zealand is the 5th highest per capita emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. We're the ones who are contributing to this problem. So what's our role and responsibility? Firstly, to recognize that taking action is good for us. Extreme weather is going to damage our naturally resource-reliant economy. We care about the survival of the poorest people in the world. A world of climate change is an unsafe world for all, and action now is a fraction of the cost of action later. This is kind of obvious to many people, But you know, you start to unpack things like taking action is good for us, and then you start to realize the huge economic transformation going on in the world. That the opportunities for New Zealand to play in the big transformative and change in the world's economy at the moment as it changes from high carbon to low carbon development is absolutely huge. And if we don't set the framework for business to operate in, then New Zealand's going to miss out on what is being called the third major transformation of the world economy. And there's lots of other reasons to take action. So this cartoon says, from your climate denier who says, so what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? Well, we get energy independence, we preserve rainforests, sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, etc. There are many reasons that we have to take action. But in our role as global citizens, one of the most powerful reasons is because we're making life a misery for other people in the world. And this is not a few people, this is millions of people. And so what's happening with greenhouse gas emissions? Well, you know, we're in a pretty bad state before, but this is the business as usual. And we're headed towards essentially what's called a 6-degree world. Now, at the moment, what you see with the extreme weather happening around the world, and droughts in the United States and droughts in Russia affecting the world's food supply, the kind of extreme storms that we're talking about, the greater intensity of cyclones, you know, you name it, there's so many of these impacts. We are less than 1 degree increase in average temperature. So this is talking about a plus 6-degree world. What is our life going to be like at that stage? And what climate scientists tell us is it's not so much the average temperature rise that's a problem, it's the extremes, and the extremes do that. And the data is that it's 50 times more likely now than in the 1980s to have the kind of drought that has affected the food supply in the United States over the past summer in the US. 50 times more likely already. And that's at 1 degree increase in average global temperature. What's going to happen when we get to 6 degrees? And who's going to bear the costs? And typically, again, it's the people who can least cope with the effects who are going to have to bear the brunt of climate change. Climate change is the issue that is likely to reverse any gains in poverty reduction and development over the past 50 years. It is a major, major problem. So this is what various countries have said in the United Nations negotiations that they're going to do about it. And what you see from this graph is a few countries like Norway heading into the green zone. And the green zone's kind of okay. It's not brilliant, but it's okay. It's actually consistent with a 2-degree increase in global temperature. And as we see, you know, with 1 degree we're already suffering, but that's 2 degrees. But look at New Zealand. This is our offer that we put into the climate change negotiations to say we will reduce our emissions by between 10 and 20% below 1990 levels. We are, along potentially with Australia, one of the worst performers in the world on the reductions in greenhouse gases that we're emitting. And we're already the 5th highest of the greenhouse gas emissions per person in the world. So our story from New Zealand is not the clean green image that we would say on climate change. Our story is, unfortunately, that we are not taking on our global responsibilities. And that's crucial. What we're doing is we're often playing games with emissions trading schemes that actually aren't substantially reducing emissions. There's 2 things wrong with this picture. One is the greenhouse gases are coming out the wrong end. Actually, methane comes out of the cow's mouths, not the cow's rear. And secondly, it's actually not reducing emissions. And so you know, we have a major problem with the instruments that have been established that are meant to be addressing the problems of climate change. The problem is that they're not, and they're not nearly fast enough. We have another problem. And the problem, as I said before, is poverty and inequality. And this parking meter earns more in 1 hour than 70% of the world's population earns in a day. Admittedly, it's a London parking meter, but that's the scale of the disconnect that we have in our world. Where a parking meter in an hour can earn more than 70% of the world's population earns in a day. It's quite shocking to think about. So, you know, we have to understand the extremities of wealth and poverty in our world today. And as Nelson Mandela has kind of eloquently said, we have the technology, we have the resources, all we need is the will to end extreme poverty. We can do that. So what does this mean? 1 billion people live in extreme poverty and 50,000 people die every day from preventable causes related to poverty. Those are staggering figures. For those of you who know one person over the past year who died, that's 50,000 every day. So it's almost too much for us to imagine, but we have to come back to saying, are there things that we can do about this? And the answer is yes, there are. This is what's happening to food prices, as increasingly with climate change and other reasons like biofuels and commodity speculation, our food prices are increasingly volatile and rising. And what does this rise in food prices mean? Well, if you're spending 2/3 of your income on food, as many of the world's poorest people do, then a doubling of your food prices means that you eat half as much. And so the incidence of malnutrition amongst children in many parts of the world is on the rise as the food prices are on the rise. So for us, you know, you go along to the supermarket, it's really expensive shop these days, huh? You know? But actually for many people in the world that don't have supermarkets, they don't have the opportunity to be able to just cut out some things that aren't strictly necessary. They're actually having to eat less, and particularly eat less protein and the kind of nutritious foods. And who suffers? It's the children who suffer. There are things that we can do about this. This is a sort of a chart showing that for companies, and companies are very much involved in these issues. They're involved in climate change, they're involved in food, etc. For companies, we have a lot of talk about corporate social responsibility, and some companies are doing great things. But as usual, we have a lot more talk about it than we have action. And the reason that companies ought to take this more seriously is shown in this picture. And this comes from a company called AMP Capital, who, by the way, have a very good socially responsible investment fund. But it shows that above the line are all of the things you generally think of as company assets. So their financials, their investments, their capital assets, their physical assets, and that's that bit there. But below the waterline is the stuff you don't see. It's brand, it's reputation, it's goodwill, it's the company's intellectual property. It's all of the things in here which actually are bound up in the company's reputation. And when a company does bad things, what happens? This gets affected. As we've seen from Arthur Andersen and Monsanto and company after company that has done bad things, and suddenly their share price and their company value has collapsed. So, you know, the message to companies or those of you involved in workplaces is actually, if you don't take the kind of the environmental issues, the ethical issues, the sustainability, the poverty reduction more seriously, then actually you're not going to be increasing the main value of your company. In fact, you're putting it at risk. And risk management of the intangibles of the company values should not be up to somebody who is a corporate PR manager. It's actually central to a company strategy. And there are ways that the public can work with this. One, we can talk about the responsibilities of companies and individuals on climate change. This is one of the climate change actions we did in New Zealand before Copenhagen. We can talk about the importance of companies on issues like food rights and food security. We can talk about what's happening to food prices over time. and particularly what the role is of some of the major food companies in the world's food system. We have 7 billion people who consume food and 1.5 billion people who produce it. But in the middle, you've got 500 companies that control about half of the world's food system. And a few companies, a handful of companies, dominate the trade in every major commodity group. So companies have a really important role to play in ensuring that everyone has enough to eat. And Oxfam's campaign is focused pretty much on the small-scale producer with regard to food supply, but it's also about the sustainability of our farming system, which is of course a real issue for New Zealand farming. We have to be able to produce more from less, with less of an ecological footprint. Otherwise our planet will not be able to produce. And for many years, the major problem has been not that the world doesn't produce enough food, it's just that the poor people can't buy it. So, you know, we've had enough food in the world, but there's still 1 billion people going hungry. We're entering a new phase now. And the new phase is that the world is going to be lucky to produce enough food in order to feed all the people. So it's not only an issue of inequality and inequity, increasingly we're entering an age of scarcity. And that's a very dangerous age, dangerous in terms of conflict and the drivers of conflict. And there are new pressures on the food supply, from our climate, from the increase in food prices, from financial speculation, etc. So Oxfam's campaign is about being part of a future where everyone has enough to eat, always. It's an international campaign. We're working at the grassroots level with communities around the world, but also through to food companies, trying to influence the major food companies, and also trying to influence the United Nations, the World Bank and others. And some of you may be aware that last week Oxfam launched what we called a freeze on land grabs, where increasingly huge swathes of land are being taken by sovereign wealth funds or big companies for use in exporting food from poor countries. And that's happening around the world. So we've launched a campaign initially on the World Bank to say that they shouldn't be financing any of these land grabs. And that campaign's going on now, and if anyone is interested, there's lots of details on our website. So we work from the grassroots. There's a lovely story of women in an area called Kup, a sub-district in Chimbu province of Papua New Guinea. It's in the PNG Highlands. It's an area where there's been endemic fighting. These are two of the three women who formed an absolutely wonderful social movement to not only stop the fighting, but also to provide livelihoods for some of the young people, and those rabbits are part of the livelihoods program for young people. And the way we work is that it's absolutely crucial that, you know, when you're doing development, you're not giving people things. That working at the grassroots doesn't mean to say you go along and say, oh, you're obviously poor, here's some aid. It doesn't work. In the same way that welfare doesn't work in our country when it's just giving people money. Everyone has a right, a human right, to basics in life. They have a right to a livelihood and the opportunity for work. They have a right to basic services, healthcare, education, clean water, adequate sanitation. They have a right to security, to be able to recover from disasters, right to a voice, to participate in decisions that affect people, and right to an identity free from discrimination on the basis of gender or ethnicity or the colour of people's skins. So the rights-based approach infuses our work. So these people, for example, are carrying water pipes to their village to make their own water supply. It's a case of really giving people the opportunities to be able to take ownership of their development. We can't do development to them, it's their development. And we as Kiwis have a role to be able to help. These are people in Samoa who are producing a coconut oil from the desiccated coconut here that ends up in Body Shop products. And so if you go to Body Shop products, you look at the coconut oil, and it's sourced from Samoa. And it's from these people, from the village level, who are getting a decent return for their products. So that's the kind of way of tapping people into global supply chains and really being able to make a difference to their lives. And one of the ways that the people in New Zealand can support is via the events that we run and the kind of things we do. This is an event called Oxfam Trail Walker, where we encourage 1,000 people to walk 100 kilometres. And 100 kilometres is a fearsomely long way. And every year, 1,000 people in teams, 250 teams of 4, will do Oxfam Trail Walker, and they'll raise money for Oxfam's work. And it's fantastic because it shows the commitment of Kiwis to be able to stand up and say, yes, we can be good global citizens. We can really help people who are in need. We can really tackle some of the world's problems by doing events like this and providing the resources for organisations like Oxfam to do our work. But the other side of it is that we can also take action on issues like fair trade. And conscious consumers are on the rise. People are really waking up to what it is they buy, what's the ethics of what they buy. And particularly, they're looking for labels like fair trade, to be able to say, we can find out under what conditions our food and our goods are produced. And fair trade is a guarantor for making sure that the benefits actually get back to the producers. There's a fair price paid to the people who produce things for us. And one way we promote this is via these events called coffee breaks, Oxfam's coffee breaks across New Zealand. Last year we had 2,150 coffee breaks in New Zealand involving over 60,000 people. People really care about fair trade. They really care about being conscious around how we act as consumers. And what we see is this is the sales volume of fair trade in New Zealand. New Zealand has been the fastest growing fair trade market in the world. So it's a fabulous story. We started from a fairly low base, where previously you could only find fair trade products in trade aid stores, and now we've managed to get fair trade products into the mainstream. And so you see the kind of rise, and this creates massive opportunities for producers to be able to get a fair price, which means to have the resources to be able to send their kids to school, to be able to get them decent health care, etc. My takeaway message is that there are a whole lot of ways in which we can actually make a difference to people's lives well beyond our shores in New Zealand, to the people who are most in need, to the 1 billion people who are in poverty and not getting decent chances in life, and to the people who are suffering from issues like climate change. We have a responsibility, but we also have the opportunities to be able to play that role as global citizens. Thank you.